definitely the players are they're the greatest. It's a transition that you make from high school to college. You have the greatest high school players play college. From college to pros, the greatest college players play pro, and so you're playing against superhuman beings. And since the competition is so great, the players are much smarter. They're keener. They're aware of what you're going to do. You can do your, as you call your thing out on the court, but you got to be careful not to do the repetitious type of stuff that you can do in college because of the fact that this won't work in the pros.
When looking back at NBA history, an era that is often overlooked in my opinion is the 70s. I think there could be a couple reasons for that. First, the 70s were filled with stars who fell far from grace due to the drug problems that plagued the NBA for a number of years. I think another reason why this era is overlooked was due to the merger. I think not having all the stars in one league hurt the popularity of basketball across the world. Add to the fact that the games during this time often weren't televised, and when they were televised, the games were often on tape delay. The league in general during this time wasn't very respected. It wasn't the mainstream juggernaut like it is today. The player that is talked about the most from the 70s probably is Kareem, and he is often known for being a dominant but not necessarily an exciting player. He might have been the best player from this era, but he wasn't the only star during this time. He actually only won one chip this decade. I actually think that you could find some of the most unique NBA players in history during this era of basketball. Looking back at players like David Thompson, Dr. J, Walt Frazier, Oscar Robinson, John Havlicek, Dave Cowens, George Gervin, and Rick Barry, these weren't just good players. These guys were very gifted basketball talents. The player who was probably the most unique from this era went by the name of Pistol Pete Maravich. Maravich was an absolute offensive wizard. He would make plays during games that nobody has ever seen before. He would have not only fans, but players on the court in awe. In today's video, we're going to take a look back at Pete Maravich's journey to the NBA, see how his NBA career played out, and also we'll take a look at his struggles with life after basketball. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to leave a like, comment, or subscribe. Also, make sure to follow all of my social media accounts. We're getting close to free agency season, so if you want to see all of my reactions to all the free agency moves going on in the NBA, make sure to follow my Twitter account. That's where I'll be posting all of my stuff. But other than that, let's get to the video. This is what happened to Pistol Pete Maravich.
You can see all that I'm feeling, no doubt, with your eyes closed. My feelings ain't getting attention, you think that I'm bitter, I say that I'm trying though. I be screaming all out to the ceiling, I feel I'm a villain. Only thing I ain't hiding no. Every night I used to be crying, I wasted my time, but now I smile so. They pressing the issue, how I'm
Peter Press Maravich was born June 22nd, 1947 in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, a steel town located in the western part of the state near Pittsburgh. Pete was talented at basketball ever since he was a little kid, and his father recognized his talent quickly. His father, also named Peter with a different spelling, played an immense role in creating what became known as Pistol Pete. Pete's dad was a former professional basketball player in the mid-1940s for the Youngstown Bears, a team a part of the NBL, and the Pittsburgh Ironmen, which was a part of the BAA. After his playing days, his dad would become a D1 basketball coach, with him being fortunate enough to be able to eventually coach his son when he attended college. Pete would describe his father as his best friend, his teacher, his mentor, and his coach. They had a very strong father-son bond, but that bond wouldn't come without his demanding expectations. At the age of 7, Pete's dad would begin to train his young son to become a basketball machine. He would spend hours upon hours practicing different passes, head fakes, and long-range shots. Pete would recall a time in his life when his father would force him to make 100 shots from the free throw line in their driveway every night after dinner before he could even go to sleep. That number eventually became too easy for the young prodigy, as it was reported by his father that one day after coming home from school, his son would make 500 consecutive free throws, only stopping because it became too dark outside to see. Before Pete was even old enough to attend high school, he was already good enough to play varsity level basketball and played for Daniel High School, located in central South Carolina. Even though he was playing for the varsity squad, he would have a lot of growing to do, not only with his skill set, but with his stature as well, with him only standing at 5'2". He would play with Daniel High School until 1963, with his game and size growing each year. During this time, though, is when his father decided to depart from his coaching position at Clemson University and join NC State's coaching staff. His family decided to make the move. Pete would end up at Needham B. Broughton High School, located in Raleigh, North Carolina. Due to his lack of size, the majority of Pete's scoring would come from outside the painted area, with him eventually turning into a lethal shooter. Pair that with his fancy dribbles, flashy passes, and much-needed growth spurt, and you had yourself a lethal offensive weapon whose game seemed to mirror a lot of elite guards that we see in today's NBA. He would score over 20 points in all but 2 games during his senior season. After his last year of high school basketball, his dad would end up taking a coaching job at Louisiana State University. Pete would end up joining his father and the LSU Tigers, as he would end up having one of the most legendary college careers in college basketball history. During the 60s, there was a rule that stated that no college freshman was allowed to play for their varsity level college team. They had to play on the freshman team for 1 season, no matter the skill level. Maravich gave a big middle finger to that rule in his very first freshman game, putting up a 50-point triple-double against Southeastern Louisiana College. In his 3 seasons playing with LSU, he would average over 40 points per game in each season. Let me repeat that. In his 3 seasons at LSU, he would average over 40 points per game in each season. Now, to be fair, his father was the head coach of the team, and he was taking over 35 shots per game in each year he played at LSU. So I don't know if he could have averaged that many points on another team, but it's still 40 points per game. As a college player, that's insane. Another reason why he averaged that many points was because, well, the program sucked. Before Pete would join the LSU Tigers during his freshman season, the team would go an embarrassing 3-23. What's even more impressive about Pete's college career is the scoring record that he still holds today. I want to put a little bit of context towards the record that Pete Maravich holds for being an all-time scorer in college basketball history. First, he only played 3 years in college, meaning he could have realistically added at least another 800 points minimum towards the record, considering he scored over 1,000 points in each of his 3 seasons. Another thing to remember is that 3-pointers did not exist. All those long-range jumpers that Pete Maravich would drill would still only count for 2 points. Man, listen to the stat I'm about to throw at y'all. Former LSU head coach Dale Brown actually went back after Maravich went on to the NBA and sat down and tracked every shot that Pete took that would have counted towards 3 points during his time at LSU. Dale claimed that if the 3-point line existed during Pete Maravich's time at LSU, that he would have averaged 57 points per game. Bro, what? And to make it even more impressive, there wasn't even a shot clock. So he was playing in an era with less possessions than today, no 3-point line, and only playing 3 of the possible 4 years. And nobody has yet been able to score more than 3,667 points in their entire career. The guard of Detroit almost did it this season, coming just 3 points shy of the record, but ultimately, Pete's record still stands today, and I don't know if anyone's going to be able to break it. This guy Pete was literally a magician on the court. Looking back at this guy's highlights, he really was a special talent way before his time. The no-look passes, the acrobatic finishes, the passes between the legs, the ball fakes, the things he could do with the basketball were incredible. In the 1970 NBA draft, Pete would be selected with the 3rd overall pick by the Atlanta Hawks. Pete would end up signing a 5-year deal with the team worth a staggering $1.9 million. During that time, that type of contract was unheard of. He would actually be the highest paid player in the NBA for his first 3 years of his career. The $1.9 million contract would be worth just under $15 million in today's money. The hype was serious for Pete coming into the NBA, and Pete would live up to the hype in his rookie season. He wouldn't come out putting up a 50-point triple-double, but it didn't take him long to find his role on the team. He would average a little over 23 points per game, along with dishing 4 dimes, as he would be selected for the all-rookie first team. The team, however, would struggle to win games as their opponents would score on average the 3rd most points per game in the league. They would end up with a 36-46 record, which still qualified them for the playoffs, but they would meet up with a strong Knicks squad who had a lot of the pieces already there that contributed to their last championship in 1972. They would get beat in 5 quick games, with Pete Maravich averaging 22 points per game for the series. In Pete's second season, his numbers would dip to under 20 points per game, and the team season would play out similar to his first season. They would go 36-46 again, sneaking into the first round just to run into a team that's better than them. This time it was the Boston Celtics. Atlanta would push the series this time to 6 games, but the result was still the same. The team would be eliminated in the first round again. After Pete's 3rd year in the league, it looked like the team might have actually turned a corner. This season, Pete would average 26 points per game, along with 7 assists, and be named an All-Star for the first time in his career. In fact, Pete and his teammate Lou Hudson became one of the few duos in NBA history to both score over 2,000 points for a season. This breakout season will also lead to team success, with them finishing with a promising 46-36 record. They still, however, wouldn't be able to avoid playing the Celtics, and they were eliminated again in the first round in 6 games. The following year, Maravich's individual play would continue to improve, and he would end up averaging over 27 points per game, being second in the league in scoring behind Bob McAdoo. He would start in the All-Star game for the Eastern Conference as he would be recognized as one of the best offensive players in the league at that time. This, however, would still fail to translate to wins for the franchise as they would end up sinking to a 35-47 record, missing the playoffs entirely for the first time since drafting Pete. After this season, the NBA would expand, adding its 18th franchise into the league, the New Orleans Jazz, which became the Utah Jazz in 1979. The Jazz wanted a franchise player to get fans into the arena to come support the team. While looking for that player, they found the perfect one they were looking for, Pete Maravich, a guy who is flashy, can score a lot of points, and is an absolute legend in the area due to his college days at LSU. It seemed like a match made in heaven, so the Jazz will offer up a trade to Atlanta to land Pistol Pete. In his first season with the expansion franchise, it would go terribly. Pete would average a little over 21 points per game, but the team would go 23-59, posting the worst record in the NBA. In his second season with the franchise, Pete would improve his scoring averages, and the team would improve drastically from the year before, posting a 38-44 record, but they still would miss the playoffs that season. In his third season with the franchise, Pete would play the best basketball of his career. This season, he would average a career-high 31 points per game for the season. He would score 40 or more points 13 times this season, along with having 4 games scoring 50 or more points. This also included a legendary 68-point performance against the New York Knicks, the most points scored by a guard ever in a game at that time. Despite the legendary play from Pete during this season, it still didn't translate to team success as the team would only post a disappointing 35-47 record, missing the playoffs once again. The following year, Pete would suffer injuries to both knees, robbing him of some of his athleticism. Even though he wasn't the same athletically, he was still a crafty enough player to average 27 points per game for the season. He would miss 32 games this season, and though the team improved, they would end up with another losing record, missing the playoffs again. People wouldn't notice at the time, but this was the beginning of the fall of Pete Maravich in his career. He wouldn't play more than 50 games in the season for the rest of his career. The Jazz desperately tried to surround Pete with more competent help, but it was no use. Pete's body was starting to break down. In the 1979-80 season, the team would move to Salt Lake City. After appearing in 17 games for the squad after the move, Pete would suffer from more injuries, causing him to sit out of practices. New head coach Tom Nasalki had a strict policy when it came to players sitting out of practices, thinking if the player isn't healthy enough to practice with the team, then he isn't healthy enough to play in the games. So for 24 straight games, Pete Maravich would sit on the bench watching emerging star Adrian Dantley take the reins as the team's new franchise player. Pete would eventually be waived in January, and he decided to sign with the Boston Celtics to finish the year, teaming up with the rookie phenom Larry Bird. He would help Boston post a 61-21 record to finish the regular season, the best record in the league. He would only appear in 9 postseason games for the squad though, only scoring in double digits once the entire playoffs. The team would also fall short of their goal of an NBA championship, losing in 5 games to a hot 76ers squad. A cool little stat that I found while researching this video, this season was the year the NBA officially implemented the 3-point line. In a limited sample size, and being a shell of the player he once was, Pete was still able to attempt 15 3-pointers this season between his time with the Jazz and the Celtics. He would end up making 10 of those 3-pointers, giving him a 66% 3-point percentage for his career. After the season concluded, Pete knew his knees were finished. He decided to walk away from the game while he still could and retired from the NBA after only a decade in the league. Pete had a hard time adjusting to retirement life, and could you really blame him? His entire life revolved around the game of basketball since he was 7 years old. The countless hours he put into perfecting his craft and to having a career cut short prematurely before he could even come close to trying to capture a championship, that had to haunt Pete to his absolute core. He was so lost, in fact, that after his retirement, Maravich became a recluse for 2 whole years. A recluse is a person who lives voluntarily in solitude, oftentimes far away from civilization. He tried absolutely everything to fill the massive hole retirement placed in his heart. He would end up suffering from alcohol addiction and depression, which eventually pushed him into being obsessed with wild conspiracies like UFOs existing far before it was a popular thing to believe like it is today. He would try yoga, embrace Hinduism, read Trappist monk books. Pete was desperately searching for the meaning of his life after his career. Pete would eventually become a vegetarian in 1982 and convert to become what is described as a hardcore and devout Christian a couple years later. It seemed like Pete had beat his addiction issues and was starting to find peace in his life. A couple years shy of a decade away from the game, and he looked to have finally found life in the form of religion and his close family dynamic with a wife named Jackie and his 2 sons named Jason and Josh. As most of you guys already know though, this story doesn't have a happy ending. On January 5th, 1988, Pete was at a church called First Church of Nazarene in Pasadena, California. Pete lived in Louisiana at the time, but he was in town this day visiting his friend James Dobson. He would actually tape a radio segment with Dobson that aired later on that same day. After taping that segment, him and his friend decided to go to a local church to participate in a pickup game with some people Dobson knew. Pete, while warming up, would eventually collapse and die right on the court due to heart failure. He was only 40 years old. This death came out of absolutely nowhere. Remember, Pete's a vegetarian by this point. He's probably as health conscious as someone can be. Dobson was actually reported to have said that Pete's last word a minute before he collapsed on the court was, "I feel great." An autopsy came to the conclusion that the cause of death for Pete Maravich was due to a rare congenital defect. He was born with a missing left coronary artery, which is a vessel that supplies blood to the muscle fibers of the heart. Due to his left coronary artery being absent, his right coronary artery would grossly enlarge over time, caused by it having to compensate for the missing left artery. It was almost like his heart was a ticking time bomb. Nobody even had a clue. It was something so rare, doctors must have not even thought to have checked it during his physicals. What makes this story even crazier is that Pete actually predicted his own death nearly 15 years prior to the incident. During an interview with the Beaver County Times in 1974, Pete was quoted to have said, "I don't want to play 10 years in the NBA and die of a heart attack at age 40. This death shook the basketball world to its core, but the main people who this death shook the most was his family. Jackie would attempt to shield their sons away from their father's passing, but it didn't matter what she did. Her sons were crushed and so was she. They had lost a great father and husband, something that nobody had anticipated coming. Jason and Josh would eventually be able to move past this tragic event and would actually go on to play high school and college basketball, with Josh actually playing at his father's old school, LSU. In June 2014, the Louisiana governor proposed an idea that LSU built a statue outside the Assembly Center named after Pete Maravich. There was a little bit of pushback with the idea, with members of the university saying that Pete never graduated from the school and they should look to honor him another way. However, after a couple years of discussion, the school decided to build the statue despite the pushback, and in July of last year, the statue was completed outside the Assembly Center. Despite not winning a whole lot in the NBA, Pete Maravich is an absolute legend and one of the most crafty offensive weapons to have ever touched a basketball. He was decades before his time. His flashy play style was revolutionary for a game often dominated by big men. Rest in peace to a legend. That's the end of the video. If you enjoyed, please make sure to leave a like. Also, let me know what you think about Pete Maravich and who do you think his NBA comp is. Also, let me know any other players you'd like to see what happened to the video on. It's your boy Said, and I'm out. Peace.